Welcome to Rash's World, where you will hear prominent voices, psychoanalysts, psychologists, therapists, philosophers, and thought leaders talk about a variety of mental health concerns and problems, including how to deal with anxiety, depression, and chronic conditions, and how to become more resilient, find inner peace, be emotionally engaged in your personal and professional life, and just be your beautiful, authentic self. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rash's World. Today we have a very special guest. We have Brian Muldoon. How are you doing today?
Good, good. Happy to be here.
Awesome. And we're going to talk about a fascinating subject, something that's dear and close to my heart. We're going to talk about your book, and which is called The Luminous One, The Making of a Messiah. So that sounds absolutely fascinating. So give us the story.
All right. Well, I'll try to give the sort of condensed version of it, but in the Christian Gospels, there's obviously a lot written about Jesus and what he did and all that, but there's a huge gap in the narrative, an 18-year gap called the lost years of Jesus. So in the Gospels, the sort of the last we hear of him is he's 12 years old and he's wowing people in the synagogue. The next time we hear anything about him, he's 30 years old. He just showed up and with whatever his message was. There are many interpretations of that, of course. But so there's a big gap there. And so this novel, and it's a novel, it's not an attempt to say what actually happened or not. But this novel reimagines him based on that 18-year period. It's like, what would you go through in 18 years that would lead you to become a profound mystic and spiritual leader, which at a minimum he was, not to mention Son of God and the Messiah and all that, which forms the basis of the religion of Christianity. So it imagines in the book that as a 13-year-old who's just had his bar mitzvah, he's pulled into working for his stepfather named Yusuf. And Yusuf is a caravan master. He runs strings of camels loaded down with building materials between Palestine and India, which where the Romans have recently been setting up camp. And his stepfather is a very hardened, tough guy who has very little patience for this kind of dreamy stepson that's been put in his care. And he's determined to make a man out of him. But Yusuf has a big drinking problem, and he also tends to be violent. And eventually, Yusuf's behavior is so extraordinary and painful and intolerable that Yeshua, which was Jesus's Aramaic name, he runs away. So it's the story of a runaway, and he kind of falls under the care of a Roman soldier who'd been providing security to this caravan, a Roman soldier named Sempronius. And Sempronius says, hey, I know some people from India. This is all happening in Afghanistan. He says, I know some people who are going on a pilgrimage in India. Why don't you go with them? You are interested in all this religious stuff. Boy, the mother of all religions is India. So why don't you head that way? So he ends up going with a family of pilgrims to Varanasi in India on the Ganges River, and is then put on his own. And he happens to be there at the time of what's called the Kumbh Mela, which is a gigantic holiday festival, which the sort of divinity of the Ganges River is celebrated. And monks from all over India all come together at this big event. And so Yeshua gets kind of swept up into that. But he notices that with all the pilgrims and the monks and everything, nobody is taking care of the untouchables, the Dalits. So he takes it upon himself to start giving leftover food to these starving kids, and against the preferences of some of the religious people there who insist that the Dalits needed to be ignored. Well, anyway, he gets into starting this, and some of the monks get kind of pulled into it, and pretty soon people are donating food, and it becomes a kind of a big deal. And he and some of the monks decide, hey, this is really meaningful to be helping out the poor, and let's make this our mission. So he starts to start doing this throughout northern India until he meets an old kind of retired monk who's kind of living under a bridge. And the old man kind of adopts him and gives him some guidance. But that guidance ends up directing him to Kashmir, uh, because in Kashmir in the first century AD, there was a huge religious event called the Fourth Buddhist Council. And the king of that part of India had decreed that leaders in all kinds of spiritual traditions should all come together and kind of brighten up Buddhism, which had kind of fallen into disarray and wasn't really being followed. Monks were kind of corrupt. And this king, Kanishka, who actually lived in the first century, wants them to basically reinvent Buddhism, which they do. And this gives birth to what we now know as Tibetan Buddhism or Zen Buddhism, different forms of kind of advanced, more modern Buddhism than it originally was. So in the book, I tried to mix in a good story, which I think it is, with actually information as to historical events that were occurring at the time and what the meaning was of the doctrines that people were struggling with.
Mhm.
At this big event in Kashmir, the king wants to know, somebody tell me, is God real or not? You Buddhists seem to think there's no such thing as a God. What's really the answer? Well, this young Jewish teenager who's kind of unafraid says, well, I can give you an answer. It's not necessarily the right answer, but I can give you an answer that I think meets your. Well, anyway, he just ends up
Mhm.
impressing this king. He goes, this who are these Jews anyway? And why haven't I heard of them before? And they go, well, it's just a small country, not very close, far away near Egypt. Well, anyway, Kanishka is so impressed uh, by Yeshua that he ends up. Kanishka is taking a caravan into China. This is the time of the first Chinese empire,
Mhm.
when all of the different parts of China were drawn together. Anyway, he ends up going to China with the king and witnessing the construction of the 10,000 ceramic soldiers that were the great historical, among other things, of the first Chinese emperor. He gets involved in arguments between different Confucian scholars, and he just loves all this stuff. He's just drawn to it, and he wants to understand. And people just think this kid is really he's really something. He's really getting this at a deep level. But he's a Jew. He's not a Buddhist. He's not Hindu. These are just things that influence him.
Mhm.
And eventually, he has some experiences that remind him of home and how much he misses his mother and his family. So he goes back to Palestine. And, he just thinks of himself as a wanderer and a storyteller. But he's also incredibly charismatic, and people are drawn in by the stories he tells. And this is the beginning of what we call parables. So he's
Mhm.
telling these parables, and he wasn't interested in being some kind of religious leader. He's just a very curious guy, uh,
Mhm.
and who had a great capacity to to connect with people of all kinds of disciplines. But sure enough, people start getting drawn to him, and this is kind of upsetting to some of the rabbis who were really kind of stuck in a very orthodox provincial form of Judaism, and very rigid, and all the stuff about only following kosher rules and all that. He's not into that. He says what's really interesting is understanding the nature of emptiness. And people are, what in the world is that? So just trying to explain himself and his adventures, he ends up teaching people a lot. And it's a kind of radical notion of God is what he's teaching. So his focus is, how do you shape your own mind in such a way as to achieve what he calls the kingdom of heaven, which is a nice poetic way of putting, a place of deep peace and understanding and tranquility. And like all spiritual masters, he's got to overcome his own ego. I mean, that's kind of the essence of the spiritual journey, isn't it? That each of us has to struggle with ourselves, and he did too. It's not like he was given a pass on it. You become a great spiritual master not by avoiding the hard spiritual work, but by engaging in it. And so just people were drawn to that kind of teaching because they'd always thought of in Palestine among the Jews there, they had always thought of God as being, kind of this bearded guy who is very judgmental and will punish you. And he's like, no, that's not what God is. That's silly. Anyway, so but this gets him in big trouble.
Of course.
Because at the time there were four sects of Judaism, and they had different kinds of practices. And the book kind of shows how he related to all four of them. But unfortunately, he is rubbing the religious leaders the wrong way. And all this takes place at a time of incredible violence between Rome and Palestine and the Jews. Because of all the nations that Rome has conquered, the Jews are the biggest trouble causers. And they're looking for somebody to get rid of the Romans. They're looking for a Messiah. But in the West, we've assumed that Messiah meant some kind of spiritual leader. I mean, that's what our Christmas songs are about. He's but no. Historically, a Messiah was a soldier, a leader of someone who was going to be able to punish the Romans and drive them out. And historically, there were several different messiahs, people who were for various times accepted. The most prominent was called Simon Bar Kokhba, and he actually was a general and had a significant Jewish army and defeated the Romans at one point. But they were so angry at that defeat that the Roman emperor sent legions of Roman soldiers who ended up destroying the Jewish army, burning down the temple, basically displacing all the Jews, at least the aristocrats who lived in Jerusalem. I mean, that was the diaspora, and it was a disaster. And it was, in Yeshua's view, because the Jews adopted the violent strategy of the Romans. Rome was able to repress the Jews for this reason, but it didn't work in reverse. And Yeshua was saying, hey, there's another way to do this. You don't have to, obliterate Rome. We need to learn to live together. And that's why the question, whose face is on that coin, is so poignant, because he basically was pointing to the path of nonviolence. So
Yeah, I
So
mean, he's
that's
a lover, not a fighter. I mean,
that's
that's
right.
how I
That's
see
right.
him, right?
Yeah.
As an ancient hippie, if you like, in many
Right.
ways. And
Yeah.
I love how like I mean this is historical fiction because
Right.
it's truly like based on events and people that existed, and the way you're reimagining or imagining it, I think is fascinating because then the period in India was a dress rehearsal for what was to come,
Right.
in Israel.
Exactly.
So I love that, and
Yeah.
that kind of gives us the background of why he cares so much about the poor and for the
Right.
poor and wants to take care of the lepers and so on because he that was his experience, adolescent experience. And I think
Right.
that's really a gap. Like I remember like Franco Sefirelli's Jesus of Nazareth is like,
Right.
there's his bar mitzvah and then he's there's adult. It's like, what happened in between? I want to know the rest,
Right.
right? So if they could
Right.
refilm that, that would be amazing of adding your details. But moreover, I think like I see elements of Buddhism there. I see elements of mysticism, of Indian beliefs, of karma and all that. So that would make sense how that becomes all embodied in this fascinating being that went on his
Right.
travels and comes like renewed.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. And because, we have to assume at the minimum that he was a remarkable, fantastic person
Mhm.
about whom we know so little. I mean, there's thousands of volumes of stories about Buddha, obviously with the Vedas in India, lots and lots of stories, but as to Jesus, practically nothing. And what we do know is kind of questionable. I'm a lawyer, and so as a
Mhm.
lawyer, you know that if you want to make a point, you've got to have evidence and reason behind it. And to ask people not to look for the evidence, I think it's demeaning. It's you need to keep an open but analytical mind, I think.
And I
So
think he's misrepresented, like I see him as like a really fun guy to hang out with, like somebody with a sense of humor. I mean, you go to a wedding and turns water into wine. I mean, I see that as the ultimate prank,
yeah,
and
right, yeah,
I think people miss that sense of humor that's hidden there. And also like his miracles was just to like wow people, like, look, there's your fish. There
right.
we go. It feeds everyone. Not necessarily, and people see it as, oh, he's trying to prove that he's the Messiah. Now, whether I don't know what you think about the miracle part, because
Mm,
that'd be interesting to see. But I see it like, well, yes, I have these powers, and I want to have fun with it. Right.
yeah.
And so
Well,
I don't see it as like, look, I am the Messiah. I'm going to prove it to you.
right,
It's not like a scientific way of showing it. And
right.
we get sidetracked with that, and
Yeah,
I think that was not the point.
right. I love that. And there are scenes in the book of
Mhm.
his getting together and partying with people, and his connection to Mary Magdalene, and that people just love that feeling of freedom,
Mhm.
of connection and of
Mhm.
love.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and it's worth noting on the miracle front that according to one of the Gospels, he was visited by three magi,
That's
right?
right.
Those
Yeah.
are magicians. Those are
Yeah.
Chaldeans. Yeah. So what were they
Illusionists. Yeah.
doing? Yeah, they were having fun,
Yeah.
and people get pulled in. Everybody loves a miracle,
Yeah.
you know, and magic. We all
Mhm.
love that. We're
Mhm.
drawn to it.
Mhm.
So I think that's a wonderful insight.
And I think also the compassion, because when he dies in such a horrible way, he comes back and he shows himself and he says, when you're eating and drinking, think of me. And so like there is not it's not the old way, the Old Testament that was like very strict on
Right.
things. He's like, have fun, drink your wine, say a prayer, think of me, and just laugh, be merry.
Right.
And I think that's kind of the consolation of like, I'm okay. Yeah, he's showing himself. Didn't have to, but it's like, I'm okay. Not necessarily as proof, oh yes, I am here, but more like, relax. Things are
Yeah.
good. Yeah,
Right. Right. Yeah. And people that that you've seen who've
exactly.
really kind of been, walking the path and are developing spiritually, that's the kind of quality they have. You know, it's not some kind of dour or militant or judgmental. That doesn't fit. Uh,
Now, about the disciples, I mean, I love Kazansaki's Last Temptation of Christ.
yeah,
And it's kind of interesting, like for different reasons. First of all, like his humanity, that he was struggling. And we take
right.
that for granted, but I mean, yes, it's human and divine combined, right? So that's
Right.
going to be, like you're saying, the spiritual path, the ego, of course. The ego comes with the human part, and then you have to deal with
Right.
it. And I think it's a bit too serious for me, the novel, Kazansaki's novel. Like he seems more serious, but the struggle is probably true. But then the other thing
Mhm.
is Judas, the representation of Judas, not as the person who's going to betray you, but as your closest ally and friend who's ready to sacrifice you. And that's been with the Gospel of Judas that's been found. It's kind of
Uh-huh.
proving that in a way. So I don't know how Kazantzakis went into that space and is probably more right than traditional way of seeing Christianity and of blaming Judas for everything.
Right. Because there is a Gospel of Judas and also a Gospel of Mary,
Hmm.
in the Nag Hammadi
Hmm.
findings. Yeah.
Hmm.
Uh, so all we can say is, well, there's a lot more to this story than we know,
Hmm.
right? And there are different Jesuses that
Hmm.
that the literature has identified. There is kind of a militant guy, and how did he fit in with John the Baptist? But many of those questions I leave for other people to answer.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's an open-ended book, in the sense that here's something that might have happened. What do you
Hmm.
make of it?
Hmm.
Um, and the big question was, what does it mean for a human being to have a divine nature? Uh, which it certainly his followers all said he had. And in the year, it was about 345 or so, the Council of Nicaea, the church fathers declared that he was fully divine and fully human. But the fully human part has been ignored,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
And if you're dealing with somebody who you also say is divine, it's pretty hard to care all that much about the human part. You go, yeah, 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 but tell me about what the salvation thing's all about. It so as a result, we've
Hmm.
sold him short in terms of what his actual story was, which we can only imagine because, like I said, there's so very little original documentation of his life.
Hmm.
And what we do have, came in 70 to 100 years after he died. So we know today that eyewitness testimony, even if you have that, is pretty unreliable. So, but
And I see this like his life and what he's talking about as an invitation to follow that path of
yes,
following him. Whereas not just like it's not just blind faith. Okay, I believe in him, therefore I'm saved. I was like, where's the
yeah,
effort there? I don't know. How did I learn anything from that?
yeah,
And so a great film is Jesus of Montreal for me, where they start it's reimagining Jesus
yeah,
today's, and they do it as a play, but they modernize it. And so
right,
they have include scientific data in it, and the priests don't like it. They are appalled by it. It's like, what do you mean you're modernizing this? Why are you like looking at the scientific evidence and all that? And then the thing is, like, as he's acting, he immerses himself so much into the role that he thinks he is Jesus. So, and I think that's a great way of like really following that path and becoming Jesus in many ways. I
right.
think,
That right.
yeah.
That yes, that's beautiful because in one of the epistles it said, "Put on the mind that is in Jesus." Well, as you probably know, that there are different meditative practices.
Mhm.
For example, in Tibetan Buddhism, where you imagine yourself to be the deity that you're praying to.
Mhm. Mhm.
and
Yeah.
and you really get into the shoes and the thinking and the clothes and the words and all that
Mhm. Mhm.
because that kind of helps give you a little oomph to really get into it at a deep level. So
And science proved that, fake it until you actually become it, and so
Yes,
so there's a scientific data to demonstrate that, to prove that.
yeah,
And so for your own experience, I find that quite interesting. So you were thinking of becoming a monk or a priest? Was that something in your
yeah.
years? Yeah.
When I come from a family of Roman Catholics,
Yeah.
very religious, and the greatest thing you can do for a Catholic mother
Hmm.
is to become a priest.
Hmm.
As my mom explained it, she goes, "Hey, the deal is if your son is a priest, then you get a complete absolution from everything that you ever did wrong in your life." So, I felt a little
A free
guilty.
pass, right? A free pass.
But we went to a Trappist monastery for some reason, driving through the Smoky Mountains on the eastern part of the U.S. And it was this Trappist monastery where they all had the vow of silence. So you
Mm.
saw these very somber looking monks slowly strolling around, and they were making the best bread I'd ever had. And I loved that bread so much. I thought, hey, I should be one of these guys, walking around thinking big thoughts. So that kind of was on my mind. But then, I had friends who went into the priesthood, very good friends, and I kind of went to their seminaries to kind of check it out. And I even had a priest come to my home to interview me for becoming a monk or a priest when I was 13. And he said, well, we'd love to have you, but maybe you should see a little bit of the world before you're only 13, before you go on this path. And I said,
Mhm.
what do you mean see the world? I mean, I'd be joining this missionary order of priests in order to spread the good news to India and China and wherever. And he goes, no, that's not the kind of world I mean. I mean, what about girls?
Mhm.
And I thought, I think I need to look into that. And
Yeah.
so, needless to say, I didn't make it to the seminary,
So the bread
but
was not enough.
the bread was not enough.
Well, my profession, I'm a French instructor, and for me it was
Uh,
crepes. And my first day of a French class in high school was they made crepes, and it's like I'm going to do this for life, and I did. But there was the temptation of becoming a priest when I was in elementary school.
mhm.
This we had religious classes in Germany. I grew up in Germany, and then
Uh-huh.
my teacher like saw my passion for this Jesus guy, which I thought was
Mm.
fascinating, and gave me a copy of the New Testament in German, and I loved it, and I devoured it.
Uh-huh.
It's like I said, I want to become a priest. I want to become Protestant in that case.
Yeah.
But then I don't know. It didn't happen. Like I just didn't follow. But I still had that in my heart. And then later on, I found Zen Buddhism, and I said, okay,
Mm.
I'm going to become a Zen monk. I want to go to a
Yes.
monastery and meditate and find enlightenment. And then at one point, I was like, well, if I want to do all of those things, I want to reach enlightenment or again connect myself with the divinity. Why not in this world, in this life that I have?
Right.
The
Right.
regular world, because there is so much there that you can do. You don't need to close yourself off, sequester yourself in different places. You can do it right here. So that's been my goal over the years of trying to
I
do that.
can't believe how parallel our paths have
Yes,
been
yes.
because one of the ways I kind of got into some of this stuff was through a friend of mine who was a Catholic monk. And there was a big interreligious event in Chicago in 1992. And I met him at a monastery. I was there for a retreat, and we became instant best friends. And we started to plan a program for this big religious event called A Monk in the World, which was just
I love
about that
that.
very thing,
Yeah.
which is you don't have to live off in the Himalayas in order to develop spiritually. The world itself is a wonderful school.
Yes.
And his name was Brother Wayne Teasdale, and he wrote two books. One's called The Mystic Heart, and the other is A Monk in the World, which I highly recommend. But he was much beloved by the Dalai Lama
Hmm.
because Wayne really embodied that Christian spirit. Uh, you know, if he saw any kind of animal, butterfly, insect suffering in any way, he immediately stepped in to take care. He was very critical of Tibetan monks who didn't actually reach out to the poor and help out. It was all about their own kind of inner work. He said, no, the world needs compassion. And you can't just use that as a concept. You have to actually practice it.
I think that's the problem with philosophy, I find. It's like,
Yeah,
you say, yeah, and utilitarianism, we got to help others, maximum benefit, maximum people. And it's like, no,
yeah,
the world doesn't work that way.
yeah,
It's you can't change people just through thinking. Because I mean,
yeah,
we had the Enlightenment, and we're still struggling today, especially today. But I think
yeah.
like there was a twist in my life too when I realized that when Zen monks talk about like being like a few feet above, a few inches above the ground, when they do everything, that kind of state of like, being like basically being high in different ways,
Yeah.
but in a natural
Samadhi.
way.
Yeah.
Samadhi, exactly. And psychoanalysis, which is the feeling like when you deal with stuff, that was exactly the sensation that I got. And then saw how Erich Fromm actually combined the two and said Zen and
Mm.
the art of psychoanalysis. So these things
Mm.
are all connected, whether it's like
Yeah.
meditation, psychoanalysis, whether you believe this. And that's why I love mysticism, because it includes everyone in
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah.
if you go deep enough, if you actually really walk the path, like follow the steps of Jesus or anybody, the Buddha and so on, that's where you'll end up, which is exactly the same place, no matter what your denomination is. And
Yeah.
I don't think we see that because we have the ego steps. It's like, no, my way is better than yours.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the struggle from the beginning is
Hmm.
getting through that. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Uh,
And
and
just that, yeah, sorry.
go ahead.
No, I just like the kind of like the fear, the paranoia, because I'm thinking of Roman times and where they thought like, well, if this is the guy who's going to bring in a revolution, and Jesus was a revolutionary, whether he wanted to be or not, he was.
Uh-huh.
And so that was the fear. That's why we gotta kill him. And the same as the establishment, the religious establishment is like, well, this guy is going against everything that we're preaching, and he's gonna take over. He's a threat to our whole core belief system,
Yeah.
and that has not gone away. And so in Jesus of Montreal, the same thing happens because he becomes persecuted by the authorities. Like, you guys can't continue with your show because it's against the religion, it's against our
Yeah.
beliefs. And in fact, it's a truer version of the beliefs because it embodies those things, right? The knowledge and the wisdom. And that's exactly what Jesus was talking about in the first place.
Right. Right. Well, and people today, I think generally are not as susceptible uh, as they once were
Mhm.
because we live in such a highly um, rational world where, your job may be um, call on you to be a software engineer, and you can't be a software engineer if you don't believe in mathematics and algebra.
Mhm.
It's not going to work. So as we become increasingly technological, our patience for things that are demonstrably untrue begins to fade. And that's why there's been such a tremendous exodus of young people from organized religions. It's like, look, I'm being trained to be extremely rational and demand proof, and, for example, code things in such a way that we get the outcome we want and that is intended. And I can't be that person and still believe in things that are this is simply patently untrue. So looking for the truth needs to, I think, be part of everybody's kind of spiritual
Mhm.
journey.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so one of my other projects is called Mind University. With a couple of my colleagues, we have developed like a 12-step program for how to train your mind to look for the truth, to recognize it when you see it, to be aware of your own internal biases. And I think that that kind of work is really important for people who are spiritual seekers,
Hmm.
to not surrender to the temptation to, to believe in the magic and the three magi rather than looking for the truth that will set you free. I mean, we got to take that part seriously.
But the magic is there. I mean, it's not the
Oh,
way
oh,
like, in a supernatural way, but still the supernatural is the natural. I mean, it's just like if you look at nature, if you take a walk, there is like magic all around you. And I think we don't really see that. And we've kind of lost that kind of faith. That's why I like the medieval times where
yeah.
people were more open to those kind of ideas. The opposite exists too, right? So I think of The Name of the Rose, where like, it's like
Yeah.
some bad things happens, like, oh, it's God like punishing us and so on, an earthquake and so on. But at the same time, well, my experience, miracles happen all the time. And I'm just like stunned when things happen, which I think like there is no rational explanation for this. And I think the problem with today's world is we can't have two different thoughts at the same time that are opposing each other. We can't hold them, which is again
Right.
looking back at philosophy. It's like A or not A. But I think it's both. There's no right or wrong. I mean, both are in a way right, in a way wrong. We're kind of opening up to that, but I don't think enough. And I think the real problem is judgment. And we
Hmm.
judge others because we are afraid. We are afraid that we might come up short. So therefore, I'm
Yeah.
gonna be like stronger than you, so I can demonstrate to you kind of bullying behavior that I am
Hmm.
I'm better and I am righteous and all that. And when you take the judgment away, then you can truly connect, and it's so much more liberating, so much more fun, and take that out of the equation, and you can actually have really close relationships with anybody, pretty much anybody. I think most people.
Right. Right. Wow. What you're saying is so brilliant. Uh, because even though I think it's essential to be rational and in terms of making our choices,
For sure.
I also believe in the magic of
Hmm.
relationships,
Hmm.
and I can see that that is very much part of your life,
Yes.
is the fun of discovery and living in an enchanted world.
Yes. Yes.
And with technology, we've lost a lot of that sense of enchantment.
Hmm.
Uh, and the natural world is suffering as a
Hmm.
result.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, you're right to have the magic and non-magic actually dance together,
Hmm. Exactly.
right?
And you can be scientific and still believe in the miracle and in all those things. I mean, I love astrology. I believe in various parts of it, right? And for me, it's fine. I can combine that with astronomy, like science. I mean, it's why
Uh-huh.
does it have to be one or the other? It can be both in many
Well,
ways.
actually,
Kind of
I,
combined.
I had that very conversation with the head of an astronomy lab in downtown Chicago.
Hmm.
I think it's by Navy Pier, Adler Planetarium.
Hmm.
And I was explaining to him, Eric, I am running into conflicts that I cannot reconcile in my own thinking. And he just laughed and he said, "Great, you've actually gotten to the point of mature intellectual maturity
Yes.
where conflicting notions play together. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You
That's why I
can
love
be both."
the koans in Zen Buddhism. It's like, you're struggling, and then that's when they see it's like, oh yeah, yeah, you're at a higher state now. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think that's we're missing out on that because it's kind of also the comfort zone. If I know what it is, then I don't have to struggle, and we
yeah.
don't want to struggle. We don't want the discomfort.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right.
And
Well,
that's
I
the
think
shortcut. Yeah.
I think you actually are a monk.
Oh, thank you.
I think you are, uh, because that is what you're exuding, is that kind of monastic fun wisdom. Uh,
And I think so. I mean, look at the Buddha too. I mean, that's like he's smiling. I mean, the Buddha that they represent. And I think,
right.
I mean, if it's not fun, then why do we exist? I mean, to me,
Yeah.
that's the whole point. And there are other parts too, of course. I mean, compassion is hugely important, but you got to also have fun in the process. And I think that's like all the major religions like actually are pointing in that way, but we're not focusing on that part because,
Uh-huh.
we ignore it. And yeah, just combine it. Again, the flesh with heavenly flesh, combining those two. Like that's the same
Uh-huh.
thing because you cannot have a soul, if you like, without the body. I mean,
Uh-huh.
afterwards, maybe they do separate, but in this life, they're together, right? So don't like have a conflict between them. Embrace them and just kind of elevate the flesh and maybe diminish somewhat the soul, so you can exist in a peaceful way. So I think that's often missing. But I like how Buddhism like the training of your mind to get into
Right.
like changing your perspective, because in many ways once you change your perspective, everything around you changes. And if I
Mhm.
go into a room and I expect bad things to happen, well, then self-fulfilling prophecy, they probably will. But if I
Yeah.
go with like expecting peace, then that would emanate, and that's contagious, the same way like smiling is contagious and so on. So if we work on ourselves, then that's the best way of changing others. That's how I see it, like
Yeah.
each one individually. Yeah.
Well, when you mention connection, I think there's a book from E.M. Forster called Howard's End, where this guy goes on a spiritual quest and so forth, and it ends with the conclusion: only connect. Connection is what we all need to be about,
Mhm, mhm.
right?
Not being right, right? Not being right. That's not
Well,
what it's
because
about.
that pushes others away, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's wasted energy in many times because often you can't convince them of like your point of view,
Oh,
but
yeah.
and you deal with that too. I think you have a book about like dealing with conflicts as well.
Yes.
So
Uh-huh.
what is your approach for that? How to best deal with conflicts, which is very important
Yeah.
today.
It is. Well, I think in the book I described four C's. Let's see, it was published in 1996, so let me see if I can remember all four. But
Mhm,
uh, you know, first of all, you have to be willing to confront the issue,
mhm,
whatever it is, not run
mhm.
away from it, not hide, but get it out there,
That's a great
first of
point.
all.
Yes.
Yeah. And we need to show compassion. And the best way to show compassion when we're engaged in a conflict is through listening, not superficial listening, but really deep listening.
Mhm.
When,
Not being on the defensive, because I find when you're on the defensive, you're not listening because you're so like thinking about yourself and how you're gonna respond to it. But just to take that off and actually like fully listen and just say, what is this person trying to communicate with me? Not just the words, but also like emotionally, the nonverbal signs. Like
yeah,
what are they on about? Like being open to that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And some of the great teachers of conflict resolution basically said good listening means you probably don't need to say anything.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
saw a film of someone doing this in Northern Ireland. He had the
Mm.
Protestants and the Catholics who had sworn to destroy each other, all in the same circle. And he just asked people to describe what their life was like because of this conflict. And he didn't really say anything at all. Uh, he just had people speak their pain. And because everyone was in a listening mode, within an hour, they were inviting each other over for barbecue and have a beer together and let's go to the pub and let's not get engaged in it. And it
Yeah.
that was magic, uh,
Yes. Yes.
of a very high order.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So,
And that's
so that,
that's real compassion. It's not the idea of compassion, it's actually embodied compassion because you are really connecting with a person. Yeah. Not
right.
that what you should be doing, right? And I think that's like I ought to be compassionate. I don't think that usually works so well.
It
Yeah.
does not count. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
And
Wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So, how do you, I mean, talking about doing different things at the same time. So how do you juggle here with, so you're a lawyer and a judge, I believe? Is that?
Well, yeah, I'm a kind of a replacement judge.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
if somebody's on vacation or sick or something, they might call on me.
You're still a
Um,
judge, right? So, and how do you like keep that in with the what you're doing here with your writing as an author of historical fiction? Like, how do you balance those two selves in within yourself?
well, that's a great question, and the answer is not very well.
And that's okay, right?
Well, because as a lawyer,
Yeah.
primarily, my life is full of deadlines. You have
Oh,
14
okay.
days to respond this,
Yeah.
30 days to do this.
Yeah.
And my life is in somebody else's hands at all time. I do a lot of family law, which
Hmm.
means deep down conflicts about divorce, custody, inheritance. Because after practicing corporate law for 7 years or so, I thought these corporations don't really care what I bring to the table.
Mm. Yeah.
And I don't actually really care that much about the business they're in.
Hmm.
We're in sort of a forced marriage here that doesn't feel right. So when I got into mediation, I took a sabbatical from the law, went and lived in Puerto Rico for a year and a half, and I thought and meditated and I prayed to figure out what is it that one would have to do in order to make good use of a legal background
Hmm.
in in what I called healing practice of law. So by viewing conflict as being sort of a disease or an illness that needs to be addressed at a deep level, my partners and I develop a strategy for how to do that, how to quickly get to the bottom of what was really driving people. Not what the law said they should be
Hmm.
doing or not doing, but what they themselves were doing. Did
Hmm.
somebody offend or betray somebody else? Is that what's driving this? And you find that when you actually get to what is at the heart of conflict, just acknowledging it and talking about it and sharing, hopefully, with the person who caused it,
Hmm.
uh, is a very powerful process. So for 25 years, did nothing but mediate out of court.
That's
And then
profound. That's amazing. Yes. Yes,
Well,
absolutely.
and it was the kind of work I wanted to be doing
Yeah.
and still do, and it's not easy, and it's particularly not easy when someone w won't buy into the idea of resolving it. They want to hold on to their resentments and their anger,
Yeah. Yeah.
and and you know, and there are times when the only way to deal with a bully, for example,
Hmm.
is to win.
Hmm.
There's no collaboration that's
Hmm.
possible. So,
Hmm.
so I developed an instrument that would allow me as a mediator to determine what kind of archetype gets triggered in a person when they're in conflict. So there are like 12 different archetypes we use to determine how do you approach a given conflict? Does it need more listening, more love? Does it need clarification? Does somebody need to kind of lay down the law? Different conflicts have different reasons, different ways of being resolved. So that's why I wrote the book, The Heart of Conflict.
Yes, no, it's wonderful. And so you have a background in psychology because you do have those concepts here, and you're applying them in many ways. Is that something you've studied on your own or
Yeah, yeah,
taught?
on
Yeah.
my own, and when I was in Chicago, I was part of a consortium of
Hmm.
people who taught in this way, either in law school or as part of graduate programs in psychology or psychotherapy. So I picked up a lot, and I
Hmm.
mean to the point even of studying the neurobiology of conflict, uh,
Hmm.
because it's one thing to get to the point where people can say what's bothering them. But if you, sometimes it's they need to learn how to use different parts of their brain. So, for
Exactly.
example, the midbrain, which is highly reactive, fight or flight kind of responses in a part of the brain called the amygdala.
Yeah.
If you don't calm down the amygdala, you're going to be driven into conflict again and again. So
And you can't
teaching,
reason when you're in that state.
right,
You can't. Like it's impossible. You can't ask the person
correct,
to reason. That's why you need to calm down, and then you can access
right.
part of your brain. Yeah.
Yeah, a guy named Daniel Goleman wrote a
Yeah.
book called, right,
Yeah.
Emotional
Fast
Intelligence.
thinking. Yeah. As well.
Yeah, about your thinking getting hijacked.
Yes. Yeah.
So people who have a practice, say, of meditation, have the capacity to calm down their amygdala. There was a nun in Chicago who worked with gang violence,
Mm.
and her solution was really simple. She called it take 10.
Mhm.
If somebody does something and you're ready to go after them and pull out a gun or whatever, count to 10 first. And chances are you never will do that stupid thing that you'd spend the rest of your life regretting.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's true for all of us.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
taking the time to actually think about what our next step's going to be. Yeah. And 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 that activates the prefrontal cortex, the part of us that sort of is a decision maker or executive. So,
Yeah. As my final question, and what is your
yeah,
next step? What are you planning to do? Are you gonna write more books, historical fiction? Do you have anything in sight that you're looking at?
I do.
Mm.
I want to write a novel. It's next up for me
Mhm.
about what I call fifth dimensional consciousness.
Oh, wow.
So, uh, so we see the world in three dimensions, right?
Mm.
So certain things are possible within three dimensions, and certain things are not. But if we went to the fifth dimension, space and time would no longer exist or control us the way they do in the third dimension.
Mhm.
So, what would it be like to live in a world where our consciousness wasn't this three-dimensional thing, but a five-dimensional thing where, you know, all the things that we consider kind of paranormal phenomena are rationally explained in that space.
Mhm.
So I want to be able to find a story, and I think it's a detective story.
Oh,
Uh,
wow. Okay.
yeah, the hero is a cop on the interstitial police force, meaning he works in the area between dimensions,
Mhm.
and that's a place that people can hide. So he's got to go out and find them there. But anyway, it's sort of a detective novel based on a level of physics that I'm really struggling very hard to understand. Uh, but I
No, that's
think,
fascinating. I'd love to have you on once that's completed too. Wonderful.
sure, I'd love
Thank
to.
you, Brian Muldoon. You're an author, a lawyer, judge, and also professor. You've been also teaching, professor of law.
Uh-huh.
Is that correct? Yeah. And your latest book is the luminous one, the making of a Messiah. It's fascinating, so wonderful, and thank you so much for this awesome, amazing podcast here.
Okay, thanks so much, Arash. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed it being
Thank
with
you.
a fellow traveler here.